Law of satiety is that animals eating to full satisfaction, or satiety, in their natural habitat will over time neither eat too much or too little for optimum health. They're not going to do that. You've got millions of species out there. They're not having any problem. You've got trillions of individuals of those species. They're not having any problem. We're only having a few isolated little pockets in the world of a few little species that are having a problem. That's because something is not happening, and it cannot be that the law of satiety is being violated, because the law of satiety is a natural law. It's just how it works. So what's happening here is there's just like when you see a rocket ship go up, you're not seeing a violation of the law of gravity or a hot air balloon. You're just seeing a set of forces here that winds up acting against each other, and then we get something that's curious. The same thing is happening when it comes to satiety. Here's a math problem. 45 years, so I'm a little older than that now, I've eaten about, call it about 3 or 4 pounds of food a day, call it 1,000 pounds a year, 45,000 pounds more or less. Now I know I don't look like it, but that's how it is. Eating about that much food. Now, if I were just 1% short, what would that mean? If I was 1% short, that means I would have been 450 pounds of food short by now. And if I was 450 pounds of food short, I would have had to cannibalize that food out of my own tissue, which means I'd be a dead Doug. There's no way I could have survived that. So I could not have survived eating 1% less food than I needed. If I ate 1% too much food, then I would have eaten 450 pounds of food too much, which means I would have stored quite a bit of fat on me. I might have 30 or 40 or 50 extra pounds of fat. Now that seems reasonable. So now what we're going to look at is we're going to look at data, for example, that takes the average woman in the United States between the ages of 20 and 40, and over that period of time, the average woman gains 1 pound a year. That means 1 pound a year is, call it 3,500 calories a year. Over 365 days, it's about 10 calories a day. Nip by nip by nip by nip by nip. It's like a little drop on a rock. It's just gently taking place where the person is systematically overeating. They are not massively overeating. They are not completely out of control. The laws of satiety are working as hard as it can on this creature to try to make sure that it eats the right amount of food, but it's missing a little bit, and it's missing always on the high side for some people, and in fact most people. The reason why this is happening, we're going to look at now, but we're going to now see how it is that you could possibly engineer a creature to be so close to perfect. Because throughout the world, they aren't 1% off, they're perfect. You look at the gazelles, look at the crocodiles, look at the llamas, look at the cheetahs, they've all got it just right. None of these things are walking around 20 or 30 or 40% overweight. None of them. And as long as there's food, they're not starving to death. They're within very, very narrow targets of perfection, just as human beings are supposed to do. So if we have a mistake, those mistakes aren't large. They can be very, very small, but they are inexorable. In other words, you cannot seem to stop them. Can't seem to keep pushing yourself away from the table with self-discipline. That does not seem to be the answer. The reason is that these are unconscious processes, and they are engineered or they're administrated through an area of the brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus does an awful lot of regulating in the body. So for example, it's regulating your fluid intake so that you get thirsty if you get a little bit low on fluid, and then you get satiated as soon as you've had enough. It's going to regulate your sleep. So if you're short of sleep, you feel it, and then you feel a pressure in order to sleep. If you get cold or too hot, you feel like moving to an area that's better. In other words, you're constantly moving and adjusting to try to put yourself in idealized circumstances for survival. The same thing is going to happen with food. There's no reason why this shouldn't work perfectly. Each and every one of you in here, every single one of you, has a perfectly functioning satiety mechanism. There's nothing wrong with it. Okay? Some of you are having more weight problems than others. Some of you aren't having any weight problems. The reasons we're about to look at. The satiety mechanism in the hypothalamus is going to be sensitive to inputs from the digestive system. And there's going to be many mechanisms. I'm just going to look at one example of how this how these problems can be generated. You have both in your digestive system, both nutrient receptors and stretch receptors. So your stomach is designed by nature to cause you to tell you to stop eating when it's been stretched out, when the receptors are getting evidence that there's no reason to put any more in there, that we've got about as much as we can handle. And so that's a primary method short-term method by when most animals, including people, say that they've had enough. If you put more in there, it starts to get them into pain. So that's a regulating system to help us eat about the right amount of food. But that's not enough. Because if you were only designed by nature just to be paying attention to stretch receptors, then we could simply fill your stomach with a bunch of lettuce, and we could put a pound of lettuce in there, which would only be about 100 calories, and you would feel fully satiated. And yet, if we did that 3 or 4 times a day, which is about what you're designed to do, is eat about 3 to 5 pounds of food a day, if we did that, you'd only eat 3 or 4 or 500 calories, and you would starve to death, because you cannot survive on that. So the nervous system cannot simply depend on stretch reception because it's not adequately reliable. You need to actually have another system, and that system is going to be nutrient reception. So that your digestive system can detect fat, sugar, and protein. It can actually find out and count how much of each of those things that you put in there. So that it can actually figure out, all things considered, about how many calories did we eat. And that's how that's going to work. So you've got different kinds of receptors in there doing its best to say how many, of this food that you just put in there, how much of the fat did I get, how much of the carbohydrate, how much protein, how much of this is just fiber. And so all together it works together as a counting system or as an accounting system to try to tell you when it is that you should stop eating and when you need to continue. This is breaking the law of satiety. You can fool the stretch receptors by basically, when you put food in there, if you take the fiber and water that was supposed to be in there with the food, we've now shrunken the food and we've got a problem. And now we're going to have to fill more food in there even though we got plenty of calories. That's going to be the #1 issue. You can fool the nutrient receptors by making the very, very concentrated nutrient in the human diet, i.e. fat, by putting it in there at a level that it can't detect it, that it's just too, there's just not enough sensitivity in the system for the people to pick that up. Most people cannot pick up high concentrations of fat. They will not judge the amount of calories that they ate very well. An experiment at Penn State University showed that if you have 2 sets of women both eating a bowl of pasta, the pasta's got about 500 calories, I think it was, of pasta and vegetables. So they both got the same amount of pasta and vegetables. It's the same size amount of food that they're going to put in their bodies. The first group is going to eat about 500 calories. They're going to be done. They don't want to eat anymore. The second is going to eat that same 500 calories of vegetables and pasta, and when they finish, they too are going to be done, except that we did something to the second group. We've put a couple of tablespoons of oil on there, and that's 300 calories. A tiniest little bit of fluid that we put on there, and it winds up, even though it doesn't change the size of the food, so it doesn't basically alter the stretch receptors at all, those people slurped up the same amount of pasta and vegetables plus 300 extra calories. Do you understand how dramatic that is? That the people over here that didn't have that in there would never eat another 300 calories of pasta and vegetables. That would never happen. That would way go past the stretch receptor and nutrient receptor activity. They're long since done by the time they go to 500 calories. But you can slip in super hyper-concentrated calories very easily, and most nervous systems can't see it. And that is the problem that we have. That, folks, is the #1 problem with weight management today.